All right. Good morning, everyone. This is Dennis Misigoy, Libertarian for the U.S. Senate here in the state of Florida, doing another Thursday live stream. This time we're getting it in before the afternoon. We're getting it in a little bit in the morning. So thank you guys for everyone tuning in or watching it after the fact. As usual, let's see, we'll try and run down a couple of events. But again, as you guys know, we're on the ballot this November, giving people an alternative to the two-party establishment. So let's see, a couple of things. This weekend, Friday and Saturday, I've got events in Pensacola, actually. So folks up in the Panhandle, I don't get out there as much. It's a little bit further out for those of us down on the peninsula. So if you happen to be out there, please come out and join us. I have both of the events listed on the website. So if you go over to misigoy.com, you will see those listed there, and go from there. One of them is a gallery night in downtown Pensacola, so that's going to be open. I'm going to be at the table the LP of Escambia County has set up over there, as well as another event we're going to be having, which is actually a paid fundraiser event for a local community organization there in Pensacola on Saturday. But we got time before and after, so if anybody wants to get together, I'm going to be there the entire day on Saturday, and obviously for this event on Friday evening. So reach out if you guys want to be a part of something and connect while we're up there. So take advantage, obviously, and I'd like to talk to as many of you guys as I can. So let's see. Besides that, looking at a couple of the things in the near future, we're going to try to do a couple more interesting things. Another thing we're looking at, tentatively scheduled right now, we're since we missed getting a nice anti-war rally gathering earlier this summer, we're looking at maybe taking advantage of less than a month away, September 11th. We're looking at Veterans Memorial Park here in the St. Cloud area, Central Florida, Orlando area. So looking at that. But we'll see. I want to talk to some folks. We're going to see what else is going to be scheduled around in the state. But definitely think about getting together for that. That's obviously a big event in terms of what that date represents for a lot of us who are really moved by issues related to foreign policy and what the U.S. has been doing, and particularly over the last 20 years, 21 years now since 9/11. So look forward to that. And we have at least one new interview. Actually, I think I mentioned it probably last week, but it's up on the website now in terms on that media page. The more recent interview from last week with David Spuria. So check that out if you haven't. Talking about abolishing the FBI, because again, even if a lot of the tensions inflamed about it right now, or maybe not necessarily for quite the same reasons, we'll take it however we can get it in terms of people doing the right thing. If people are really want to hold these agencies, which didn't just recently become politicized, but have always been politicized from the very beginning. We're all about illegal surveillance and blackmailing of political figures, and a lot of really terrible stuff, and targeting of civil rights leaders. We're obviously talking about the early days of the FBI, going back to J. Edgar Hoover, and the character of the organization never really changed. There was never really this purging of the past leadership. So this is just what's continued, and certainly a lot of the stuff that we've seen in the era of the War on Terror, where in particular you've seen this story repeat itself of informants going in and trying to find impressionable individuals within any community, radicalize them, and then manufacture some kind of plot to entrap these folks. So that's the sort of thing that really animates me on this subject, not so much the recent raid on President Trump, but if it helps move the needle in the right direction, I certainly don't mind. Talking about the right thing happening and the needle moving in the right direction, again, I'm not so certain about this one, but obviously the big news this week, not the sort of thing I usually like to take too much of an interest in, with being the partisan primaries for Republicans and Democrats, but Liz Cheney is out in Wyoming, so that makes for an interesting story. Obviously, the daughter of former Vice President Dick Cheney, and a big supporter, not just in word but also in deed, of that war on terror and all of the excesses that came with it. I was recently posting a clip at least on Twitter. I get it on some other social medias, but of her in an interview, basically doubling down on support for waterboarding. So it's one of these things where we've got an interesting dynamic now where this one half of the country who once decried her father as just being the devil incarnate is now treating her, who pretty much holds the same policy positions, who advocates all the same terrible things that her father did, and which got her father that presumably, let's say presumably, I'm not actually sure to say, but presumably is the reason why people had such negative feelings about her father. And yet, her holding those same views is currently lionized as a hero and principled and courageous for standing up to Trump and voting for impeachment. Now, it's an interesting dynamic. Something else I noted I thought was particularly interesting was the fact that sort of the different response here, because it was another Republican congressman who voted for impeachment, which was Peter Meyer from Michigan, who had actually taken over Justin Amash's seat after he left Congress. And he voted for impeachment, so you would think, well, hey, courageous Republican, really deserved to be, kind of treated in the same deferential way. But instead, at least some Democrat organizations, obviously you can't say every single Democrat got behind this, but there were Democrat organizations that were pumping money into his MAGA primary opponent, who unseated him. So the guy who beat him, again, as a big Trump supporter, opposed to Congressman Meyer, that guy got funded by Democrats who were trying to get out this guy. So Democrats making a conscious effort in that case to get rid of somebody who actually voted for impeachment. So it's interesting, sort of the difference in behavior, one versus the other, where, and maybe some of this is a difference between what is seen and unseen. On the front, they're happy to act as though they really care about these people and really appreciate their courage and bravery. And on the other side, they're more than happy to undercut them by supporting the really extremist, what they at least regard as the really extremist element in the GOP. So it's a peculiar dynamic. I see a lot of people within sort of my circles, libertarians, anti-war folks, kind of doing a little bit of a victory lap about Congresswoman Cheney's loss in the primary, and obviously that's going to mean the loss of her seat in Congress at the end of this term. So, but I'm very reticent to kind of, maybe take such a long victory lap, because obviously it's great to see her gone, but we have to remember obviously that the reasons that she was removed have really nothing to do with the stuff that we actually are really upset about. It's not about the endless war. It's not about lying to get into Iraq. It's not about waterboarding. It's not about any of these things. So we really need to temper the attitude that we have about it with the recognition of what is actually the reason why she's out, but not even just the reason why she's out. Maybe that's even secondary, because the reason almost matters less. I always say, look, if you do the right thing for the wrong reason, you still done the right thing. But the question is to also go with. I always like to reuse this question. It's one of the Thomas Sowell's 3 questions for whenever people are proposing a new policy and stuff. One of the first questions is always compared to what. And so Liz Cheney will be out, and she's going to be replaced by most likely the Republican who defeated her in the primary. Her name escapes me right now. Is it Hageman or Hageman? I don't know how they pronounce the G in her name. But as someone with a G in my last name, I'm mindful of this sort of thing. So, but anyway. The question is, what kind of congresswoman is she going to be? What is the things she's going to vote on? How is she going to vote? Okay, so maybe she won't vote for impeachment. That's really, that'll matter to certain people who are obviously big Trump supporters, but it really not going to matter much to me. What's going to matter to me is how's she going to vote on foreign policy? How's she going to vote on the spending? How's she going to vote on the NDAA? Those are real things, and I'm less certain, or at least less optimistic, that if that when the next NDA, that when she gets the first chance to vote on an NDA, that she's going to vote against increasing quote unquote defense spending. I'm more skeptical of her willingness to do something like even the Yemen War Powers Act that's floating around in Congress, or let's see. Last year, and I always point this example out to people. Last year, in Congress, 3/4 of House Republicans voted against repealing the authorization to use military force to go into war in Iraq to stop Saddam Hussein from getting weapons of mass destruction in 2021. Obviously, that's a piece of legislation from 2003. Saddam Hussein has been dead for quite a long time now, and so on and so on and so on. But Republicans are still, by and large, even though it's supposed to be the turned over the new leaf, and people want to believe that it is no longer the party of Bush, Cheney, McCain, and Romney, just because it's also the party of Trump. I'm less inclined to believe that there is that the Republican Party has transformed that greatly, at least in terms of the substantive policies, because what have they done in terms of these things? And so that's a little bit of my rant and sort of thoughts on that. Let's see. What else do we have to kind of mention? I guess along the same lines, I saw Pence coming out recently and talking, I guess, maybe about testifying for the January 6th committee and whatnot. Pence is another character, and it'll be really interesting to see how willing as I would jokingly refer to him, since he was governor in Indiana and was obviously one of the controversial items of stuff that he supported in the past was conversion therapy. If you're not familiar with that, that's like people trying to shock people who have basically trying to shock LGBTQ folks into being normal, trying to electrocute them and stuff. It's really strange sort of stuff, and and obviously very controversial, and very, I shouldn't even say controversial, but just very strongly opposed by a lot of folks on the cultural side of the left. And so it would really but it seems like every other issue is kind of secondary to the obsession with Trump at times. And so I'm halfway expecting there to be all this praise for Pence if he comes out and does a little more of the stuff, as being, again, principled and courageous and whatnot. But he's still the same guy that he was before all this, and the same guy who pushed for all these sort of policies and things that people find really abhorrent. So that's a better word for it. So let's see. What else do we have? There's something interesting going on in China. I won't pretend to be a super big expert, but I'd encourage everybody to kind of go and do a little bit of research on what's going on in the economy. China, of course, is the next largest economy, but not just that, but also the next biggest defense spender, military spender, if you will, in the world after the U.S. I mean, it's not like we're probably outspending them 3-1, I believe, about the ratio's about, so about triple what they spend. And they are often sold to America as like kind of the big boogeyman nipping at our heels, and if we back off from trying to rule the world, the Chinese are going to go in and they're going to take over and exert influence over every other country and this, that, and the other thing. But they're the big boogeyman that is presented to the American people very often, particularly when folks like myself want to talk about dialing it back and not continue on with this crazy policy of looking for conflict everywhere and endless military spending, endless increases. We're looking at the NDA for next year is going to be over $840 billion. That's more than 4/5 of a trillion. And getting back to the original point, though, there's something Chinese economy is having a real big problem where I forget quite exactly the detail, but you have what is this? I see nearly 500,000 customers have lost deposits as the banks have been very non-judicious, unjudicious. I'm trying to think what's the right way to do that, but basically careless in their lending to developers. Obviously, there's been a big push for more development. There's a lot of things going on in China, but apparently there's been a really bad issue with developers kind of Ponzi scheming the money that they get for one development and start building something, and then get money for people for new developments and to finish the old stuff, and it's and eventually none of this stuff actually getting done, but and a lot of this money being lost, and now there's this cascade of default. It seems to be quite a big problem. Again, I'm not doing justice by describing it. I'd really encourage everybody to go and do a little research on it, but it just kind of comes back around to this point that and there's certainly a variety of other reasons, even without the current situation that's going on in China, why I would have told anybody who was looking at this that China is not the threat that's presented. There is no chance of them turning around and becoming this world empire or imposing their will on us or dictating. I mean, could they maybe bully Taiwan and a couple places, in their immediate vicinity? Maybe, but they've got a lot of internal problems that they need to resolve. Centrally planned economies don't work, and this will help me segue over into, again, one of the kind of big issues that I have with our incumbent Senator Marco Rubio, because he's a big China hawk kind of guy who's always beating the drum about how terrible China is and what a big danger China is and how China's doing this and China's doing that. But one of the things that really irks me to no end is the fact that, in particular, a guy who also tries to beat the drum a lot about communism. Certainly we do that a lot here in Florida, and I wouldn't do any less. Obviously, as a son of the Cuban exile community as well, it's obviously something that matters a great deal to us, and we have to recognize what the problem is. And the problem is having a government run the economy, centralized control over something that really can't be effectively controlled centrally and really shouldn't be. People should be free both from a moral standpoint in the fact that you have individual rights and you deserve to be free, but also from the standpoint of things will be best if we are free, from the pragmatic, from the consequentialist sort of perspective of it. And so what really bothers me is oftentimes when you hear about, in particular, where they justify subsidizing particular industries and this kind of central economic planning from Congress, Senator Rubio will very often highlight the fact that, well, China's, it's not a level playing field. China's subsidizing this, that, or the other industry, and so our companies can't compete. And it's almost as though he thinks that that's good economic policy, having government take money from the marketplace, from productive sources, and then reroute it into another industry to try to prop that up. He seems to think that that's good economic policy because he thinks, A, that China's getting ahead by doing it, and then B, we should do it too to be able to compete with them, because otherwise our companies are at a disadvantage. Now, it may be that in this one particular industry that may be the case, but it's not good policy, and that's part of why, communist governments, communist economies, centrally planned economies don't work out. Because this stuff doesn't work, because the guys in, whether in Washington, D.C. or in Beijing, they don't know what's best. They don't know where the resources would be best spent. The way we figure that out is through free markets, through a price-coordinated economy where people, individuals, decide where to put their money, both in the short term, the long term, where they spend it, where they invest it, and this and that. They're going to do a better job than anyone in the government will, than everyone in the government will. And that's really what it boils down to. And so, but he seems to, as much as he wants to decry them for who they are, he wants to emulate their policy. And that's quite the opposite of what I want to do. And this is, again, sort of the fruits of their policy. This kind of, again, push from a central authority to kind of build all this housing and to do this and that. And how that has cascaded down in terms of all the other impacts related to it. So it is, it's instructive, but it also sort of tears off this veil of, oh, we've got this big threat over here that we need to be really scared of and we need to watch out for. Now, there is a threat. I do want to be clear about one thing. If we antagonize a conflict, if we initiate a conflict, China is a country, just like Russia, which seem to be wanting to antagonize and instigate with. They are a country that has nuclear weapons. I don't think they would be able to really compete with us as much as some might think in a conventional war. But, they do have the kind of weapons that can, change the game. Certainly we do too. We have more than any of them. But nobody wins in that kind of war. And we don't want that kind of conflict. So there's no reason to keep agitating for that sort of conflict. And that's what we have from a lot of people in our government, a lot of our quote-unquote leaders agitating for conflicts that we don't need and that don't serve our interest and certainly aren't about protecting the security of our country. They are about pursuing this vain idea of the U.S. As overseer of the world, policeman of the world, global hegemony, the idea that, and you hear it when we talk in particular a lot about the Russia-Ukraine situation where people say about, well, how can we let them do this? We can't allow them to do this, the Russians in particular. And I think people need to grasp the limitations of our power. Even the most powerful country in the world with our over-the-top sort of defense spending, top-of-the-line everything, just go down the list. Even with everything we had, we spent 20 years in Afghanistan. Trillions of dollars, probably more than 1 million dead overall. And when you talk about downstream sort of effects of the war, not to mention what's happened to some of our own troops and people who've come home with PTSD and the epidemic of suicide among veterans and active duty military. So there's a big cost that we've incurred, more than 20 years, the longest war in American history. And what happened? A week after we left, the Taliban had control of the entire country again. So, our power has limits. Everyone's power has limits. Obviously, if you want to just go, if you just want to go scorched earth and just incinerate a place using nukes, I mean, technically you could, although some of these places have nukes to fire back. But in terms of just controlling the world and being able to decide who's going to be in charge, like, our power has limits. It's not only that we shouldn't do it, but also we can't do it. We don't have the power. And the insistence on trying to do it is bankrupting this country. Again, we're $30 trillion in debt. Inflation didn't get to 9% mainly off of this. That it was mainly sparked at this level by the crazy spending, again supported by both Rubio and Demings in the wake of COVID. Stuff like the CARES Act that nobody really figured out, well, how are we actually going to pay for any of this? And of course, money going to all these different places, very little of it, comparatively speaking, way less than half of all the money that was being spent out of to deal with the COVID, with all of the economic disruption during COVID. Less than half of that, by far less than half of it, was going to actual relief to individuals, which at least if you're going to do some kind of relief, that's something where I'll say, okay, this makes sense to do. But what was being given out to companies and everything else, maybe not so much. Obviously, there's a lot of other things that needed to be different about what went on at that point, certainly in terms of forcibly shutting businesses down and everything else. But I don't want to rehash all that necessarily right now, but I do think it's instructive. Again, just kind of coming back around to all these things that, this is the policy that that has been supported by the folks in the establishment, and we're not going to get out of these issues and be able to move forward as a country as long as we have these people in power who continue to support these kind of policies. And even where we're able to beat them away and stop them on one thing, as long as it's the same people with the same tendencies, we are not going to get real change. And we've got to be honest with ourselves about that. So, and that's why, why it's important for me to be up here as a candidate and be on the ballot so that folks have a serious alternative to that. Someone who's not, coming here to make a joke about it, coming here with a little bit of experience, but also at its core the principles that about the principles on which we can base, this change and recognition that we cannot continue this path, and how are we going to move forward? We need to have it grounded in something, because right now it's just whatever's been convenient and whoever's greasing the right palms. We can't continue this way. Obviously, I think it's we can see it, but we just need to have the courage to actually stand up and reject the two-party establishment and say, we need something different. It's time. Now is the time. And you guys are the ones who can do that. You guys are the ones who are in a position for it. Everybody here in the state of Florida. So let's do it, man. Let's make it happen. Let me see. Looking through some things, I'd be remiss if I didn't point out, because it continues to obviously be ever present, but all of the commentary about and I've probably talked about this already, but the Inflation Reduction Act. I think one of the funniest questions or things I've seen asked to somebody, because obviously if anyone's been listening to some of the talking points on this is like the miracle legislation. It really epitomizes the absurdity of dishonest politicians who promise you absolutely everything and want to give you everything, and promise you the moon and deliver nothing and whatnot, and they just don't care. But you hear about this and the Inflation Reduction Act. Well, it's going to fix all these problems. It's going to deal with the climate crisis in a way we never have before, and do all these measures for this, and it's going to invest in these industries. And they don't like to point out the fact about the 87,000 IRS agents, but that's also something else in there. They talk about how it's going to make certain kinds of healthcare more affordable, and it's going to I'm trying to think what other random issues they talk about it dealing with. But nobody can really explain how it's going to actually reduce inflation. And in particular when you're dealing with all this spending, because there's a whole bunch of spending. Oh, they're going to make the rich pay their fair share. The ultra rich, of course, and nobody else. That's one of those things where you have a hard time thinking that folks can really believe that if they're thinking critically. But we part of how we got here is we have such an overabundance of like really hyper partisan folks who are just going to beat the drum for the party line no matter what they say, and this is one of those things. But I think it is sort of a funny thing to really ask, and I saw some reporter asking it of somebody in Congress. I can't remember which representative it was, but basically saying, hey, well, what provisions in this law are going to actually reduce inflation? And the guy's response was, next question. So, it's quite humorous in that regard when you think about it, the fact that they're really, for all the things that they're going to tell you that this legislation is going to do, they cannot tell you, and obviously that's just one anecdotal result, but I certainly haven't seen any explanation, because there is no explanation about how it's going to actually reduce inflation. You want to reduce inflation, you have to be reducing the money supply, and I don't think that when they're talking about taxing the top income earners, the folks over 400K, I don't think that they're talking about taxing them and then making the money disappear, because obviously their intent is just to spend more money. So what is the provision there that's going to actually reduce inflation? You wonder, obviously, whether or not these folks really understand what inflation is, and they understand that we're talking about increase in the money supply leading to a loss in the value of the dollar. There's no shortcut to it, and and obviously they're just being dishonest. And at the same time, obviously, what was it, a week or two ago, Biden was out saying that inflation was at 0% now, because obviously he was comparing it to month, based on whenever it was. And so, well, if inflation is 0%, why do you need an Inflation Reduction Act? But the rhetoric is all over the place, and it's incredibly disingenuous, and it's just more business as usual. And that's the unfortunate reality of all this, is that I expect that all this will continue to be very much business as usual. This is, again, they just rebranded all this stuff, rather than passing the Green New Deal and Build Back Better and whatever else. It's the Inflation Reduction Act, because inflation is the big issue. So we're going to call it the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's going to do all these other things that have nothing to do with inflation and are probably going to make inflation worse rather than actually help with it. But we're going to call it the Inflation Reduction Act. And that really, again, epitomizes sort of the business as usual politics that I take issue with and think we need to move away from. So if you want an opportunity to move away from that, why don't you come on and help me out over here. Go to Misigoy.com. Hit the donate button up at the top. You can help us out. If you're here in Florida, you want to show your neighbors that you care more about liberty than they do. Why don't you go on the top link over there on the menu bar, hit shop, go pick up a sign, put that out there and let people know what you support. And but we've got to begin sending the message and spread the message and let other people know that they are going to have an alternative. Obviously, we got the primaries coming up here in Florida. Next week is when it's going to be. August the 23rd is going to be the election day for the primary election. So it's important for all of us to, for at least for your local elections, get out there if you are on one of the partisan sides. Obviously, for this race, we pretty solidly expect it's going to be Val Demings. It seems kind of like a formality at this point, but you can never be absolutely certain. But we got some ideas in terms of things we're going to do once that's official, and we're looking forward to moving the conversation forward, because folks in this state are going to have 5 names on the ballot when they go into the voting booth to select for U.S. Senator here in November, and we're going to give them and we're going to do everything we can to give them the right information, to let them know where it is that we stand, the difference between those guys and us, and move the conversation forward and give people the real understanding of how desperate this situation is and why we need to change and why it's so important. Because it really is at this point, again, you can't say it enough, between the conflicts escalating with some of these other nuclear armed powers, 30 trillion in debt, 9% inflation. How much more do you need? How much more do you need? And where do you draw the line? And we want to cut in places that are easy to cut, but you need common sense. You need to stop ruining people's lives. There's so many aspects to it, and it can't be stressed enough. So that is the spiel. I'm past my time, so I'm going to wrap it up. Thank you guys for joining me again. Visit the site if you can't help out there. If you're going to be in the Panhandle this weekend, Pensacola, I'm going to be out there. Come on and join us. The events are listed on the website. Go there and check it out, and we'll talk to you guys next week if I don't do it sooner. Thank you.